Hi, welcome to Understanding Conscious Cryptids with me, Khat Hansen, your host. Hi everyone, it's me, Khat. Welcome to today's lesson, and it's going to be kind of a funny one because I've had requests from a couple of my patrons to tell some stories about Kyosa and his clan. As most of you know, I met them as a young child. I was 4.5, almost 5 when I met them. Long story short, they followed me home, and I got to keep them. Not really, they decided to stay with me down in my canyon. I have lots of stories about them, and I've told many of them before on the various interviews that I have done, so I'm not sure which ones to tell again. I know that sounds kind of strange, but you only have so many remembrances of people as a child, and then you go into the ones that you know of them as adults. So if you've heard these stories, I ask that you bear with me. I still interact with them pretty much at least twice a week. They have aged as I have aged. Their children have grown up, and now live amongst them. Some do anyway, and others have left. So, that being said, the funniest story that I can always tell about Kyosa was the one with my father. You see, they don't have a sense of stealing. Their perception of stealing something is not there because they believe that all things that are here on this earth, on this realm, are everyone's. So they kind of have a hard time with that. It's like with fences. They really don't understand fences at all, and in many cases, you hear about them either walking through the fence or over the fence. There's no stories of them going around the fence and respecting that boundary per se. Even I, who have boundaries for them, they will still step over that fence, over my wall, and it's a game to them pretty much because they think we're silly because we have this. They just don't understand the concept of a wall. So all things here by the Creator are meant for everyone according to them. So that being said, the funniest stories that I have about Kyosa and his group are when I'm younger, and I specifically remember them doing things to tick my father off. That's the best way to put it. You see, my father knew what they were and how they had their own belief systems. He grew up hearing the tales of them and understanding about them. Added to the fact that my Uncle Buck interacted with a group as they were growing up in their late 20s. So it was kind of just a given, for him to understand that these were a people, and my father worked very hard for what he had. So he wasn't prone to just letting it go. And by that I mean by having it thieved. And Kyosa has like this massive craving the entire time that I have known him for birds. Birds of any kind, it does not matter. Pheasants, chicken, quail, ducks, dove, pigeons, robins, woodpeckers. He doesn't care, he will eat them. And the way that he eats them reminds me of a pregnant woman with a craving. I know this sounds horrible, but as a mother, I feel like I'm justified and can say this because that's what it is. It's like a craving to him, a really bad craving, like someone who craves a cigarette. Anyway, my father, as most of you know, raised doves and pheasants and quail for the state. That was one of well, it actually wasn't the state. I should clarify that. It's for something called Pheasants Forever, which is a program that's run, at least in Oregon at the time. It was ran by the Forestry Service. So, that being said, we raised them. We had a big chicken house. It literally was 3 sections just for the inside. So it was like a small barn almost with 3 different sections, like a T shape. And every night we put the hens up because we had raccoons and foxes and cougars and other things, possums, all kinds of things that would come and eat them. So every night they got put up. Now the only way to get them out was to unlatch the cage. I've never met a fox, snake, possum, raccoon, any of those that could work the safety latch that was on those. The only people, and there I say that word, people that could work them were humans and the Steyama people. And for some reason, Kiasa and my dad just bumped heads, like massively. Okay, there was no understanding between them except that this is my property, stay off of it. If you come up here, I'm going to shoot you. And that was literally how it went. So we put fish down in the creek. We stocked the creek, and they fished them all out. So my father went kind of crazy on that one. Then they started wiping out the crayfish. Then they started attacking the ducks. Then they started eating the geese, and away it went. It was just like a chain effect. So my father turned into like this crazy psycho dad, in that he would sit up at the top of the canyon and he would yell out over the canyon so that it echoed down to the bottom, and he would scream at them, "I'm putting ducks out today, and don't you dare eat them. If you dare eat them, I'm going to blast you in the ass." That's what he used to say. So, of course, Kiyosa, I guess, took it like his personal challenge, because the others didn't do this. They did not do this per se. It was Kiyosa. And so he would take all the ducks, and he was very good in that he would leave the skins, he would just peel them off of them like a banana and leave the skins laying there with, and my father would go crazy, just crazy insane. So we got a batch of these huge chickens called Rhode Island Reds, and another batch of chickens called Leghorns, and they were big. And I'm not kidding when I say big. I mean, they were big, because when I raised one of them up, he was the size of a small turkey. So I had them up there amongst the peacocks and the pheasants and all the other birds that I liked. And I don't know why, but he took it as his personal challenge to go raid the hen house every night once we got them. And my bedroom was upstairs. So my father took over my bedroom because it had a balcony, and he could look out on the balcony. He sat his chair out there, cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and the 30-06 in his lap. And he was waiting for Kiyosa to come up to that chicken house. So I'm not sure if Kiyosa used stealth mode, what he was doing, but he was getting past my father, which is really hard because my father was like really right on bird's eye, eagle eye, just period. And he was using a scope, and he just didn't see him get into the chicken house. But all of a sudden, you'd hear the chicken start screaming. And then my dad would go crazy. Instead of firing off a warning shot, he would run all the way back through my bedroom, down the stairs, and out through the kitchen, around the balcony porch that went around our house, and down the stairs, down through the dirt road, around to the corner where the chicken house was. And as he got within about, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 yards from it, he would start shooting, even though Kiyosa wasn't there. And then Kiyosa all of a sudden would be running through the barn door, out the door, ducking and shoving an entire chicken and nest full of eggs or baby chicks in his mouth as he was running. Okay, so it just was ridiculous looking because his face was stuffed full of birds, feathers, and birds and nest, and it was just crazy insane. And my father shooting at him and running after him. And I know darn good and well my father always shot what he aimed at. So I was like really shocked that he never connected with Kiyosa. But then it got so bad that it was making my father nuts. I mean nutso. So I went down to the canyon and I said, please stop doing this, you know. And as I was begging him, Kiyosa was looking at me, pulling out feathers and straw out of his mouth and sucking eggs, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, it was ridiculous. Then he was eating the baby chicks another time, you know, and he was popping them in his mouth like grapes. And I mean, I got mad then. I was like, you know, you need to stop doing this, you know, because I'm going to get mad at you if you don't stop doing it. And his response to me was pretty much, doesn't matter. I was like, oh, something's going to matter. Something is going to matter. So I tried to outfox him in that I had pet raccoons. I had 4 of them, and I had a possum. And they were not very nice at times. As they got older, they got to be pretty moody. And I transferred all of the chickens out of the chicken house that day and put up a sheet along the cage line for where my raccoons lived. And I pulled them out of their habitat over to the barn. So there was no way that I pretty much figured that he could see this. So I got them all in there and put in this pen. Okay, their pen was huge. It was the size of a 12 by 25 foot tall cage, okay? It was tall and pretty big inside for them. Not to mention they each had their own little homes. So to be stuffed into this chicken coop, they were in really foul moods. Really foul moods. So I'm sitting there behind the incubator that's across from them where we would incubate the quail eggs and such. And I'm sitting there hiding behind that and couple bags of feed, waiting for Kiyosa to come. You know, my father was up on my porch, pretty ticked off. I don't know if he thought I was downstairs studying or what, but he didn't know that I was in the shed, the chicken house, with them. And long about 11:30 at night, here comes Kiyosa. And I can hear him fumbling with that latch on the door to get in. So he gets in, and I'm still sitting there watching him. He's so focused and fixated on that chicken coop that he doesn't even realize I'm sitting across from him, you know, next to the incubator. I mean, he should have smelled me, but he didn't. And he was so fixated on that cage. And I remember him stopping and looking over his shoulders, you know, like a kid does when they're going to get in trouble. And then all of a sudden, he fumbled with the latch, and my female raccoon, Penny, kind of stood up and made some noise in the cage, in where all the nesting boxes were right there in that. And then the next thing you know, I don't know if that got him excited or what, but he ripped the door off the cage. And all of a sudden you have a couple boar raccoons and my female raccoon and my possum who sleeps with the raccoons and is really nasty. All of them charging for that door because they want to be let out of there. They don't like being all stuffed together. And now here's this big hairy person trying to reach in and grab them, and it's not, they're not happy. So they're snarling and making these sounds that only raccoons make, and all of a sudden Kyosa must have realized I was there because he spun around and he gave me the most hated look in the whole wide world. And I wasn't supposed to cuss, but I did. I yelled at him. I stood up and I was throwing these seed blocks that we had for the chickens. I was throwing them at him, yelling at him, "Get the heck out of my dad's house. Get the hell out of here," and I was yelling at him. So he started to step out the door, and didn't get a chance to grab anything because all that was there were raccoons. And as he stepped out the door, I hear my dad yelling, "I got you, you SOB, I got you," and he's shooting at him, and I'm throwing stuff at him. So needless to say, he took off running through the forest, down through the canyon wall, and I'm standing above him throwing big things at him. Now anything I could grab I was throwing at him and yelling at him, "This is mine, this is mine." Well, he got down to the bottom of the canyon and just let out this horrible roar. And I remember my dad being so ridiculous and my uncle standing there. All of a sudden you hear my dad roar back at him. And my dad was a big guy, he's 6'6" almost, he's a big guy. And he was roaring back at him. And then all of a sudden there's just dead silence across the canyon and my house. Okay, and my uncles are all standing there, and I'm walking back up, and they're like, "What were you doing?" And I said, "I was throwing stuff at him." I said, "I need a flashlight because now I'm going down there and telling him off." Well, when I got down there, he was sitting there. He had his feet in the water, and he was so dejected looking. And I told him, I said, "You can't steal from us." And he said, "Not yours." And I said, "Yes, mine. My allowance went to pay for them. Those are mine for my 4-H project. No." So it was a big, long argument, one-sided discussion with me telling him not to steal from me and him telling me no, no, no. So the next day, my father had this big cast iron clawfoot bathtub that he used for our 2 horses that we had. And that thing is heavy. I mean, it was heavy. It must have weighed like 6 to 800, maybe, I don't know, 1,000 pounds. I mean, they're heavy. And this one was real big. Anyhow, the next day, it was missing. And my father was down there scratching his head, and I was looking all over for it. There were no drag marks behind, on the ground from it. He had just picked it up and carried it off. And my father looked at me and he said, "You better get that back up here or you're going to be grounded." So I'm down in the canyon asking them, "Where is it?" And I'll be doggoned if not every single one of them gave me just this like moon-eyed look and innocence and said, "We don't know what you're talking about. Describe." And I'm trying to explain, and they're like, "No see, no see." And I'm like, "Yes, you saw. I know you saw." And they said, "No, no see." And you have to remember, at this point, they've been living at my home for a few years, so they do know what this is. So I ended up going back with my father to the back property and bringing forth a cattle watering cistern. That's a big metal thing, and putting that in for them, for the horses. I was so ticked off. I did not find that bathtub, that cast iron clawfoot bathtub, until 8 years later, in the back orchard, buried under some blackberry vines. And when I confronted Gus about it, I was told, not yours, not mine, forest. And it basically was, finders keepers, you lost it. So, in trying to explain to my father where it was at, my father had a cat, a bulldozer, and he was like, I'm not taking it all the way back there to the back property. You know, he said, screw it. If that's where they put it, that's where they put it. You know, we're using the cattle waterer now. And I was like, okay, well, that's the way it is. And for the most part, that's how they are. They will take things because they don't understand the concept of human ownership of something. It just doesn't seem fair or right or even make sense to them, you know. They had a hard time understanding my animals as a child, because to them all animals are free. So my dogs are my dogs. Don't touch my dogs. My cat is my cat. Don't eat my cat. You know, my birds, my bunnies, everything that I use for 4-H, don't touch it, you know. And there again, it didn't go over well. It pretty much went over like a lead balloon with them. You know, there were instances, because my rabbits lived in a giant warren. My father had fenced off an area for them, you know, and they were open air, and they were able to dig small warrens underneath there. And one of the funniest memories I have of Nally is him up to his shoulder trying to pull a rabbit out of one of the burrows there and getting bit. And he was getting bit, and every time he'd yank his hand back, he'd stuff it back down there, and then he'd pull it back out really fast and stuff it back. And I'm standing on my balcony watching him, and finally it dawns on him that there's someone on the balcony watching him. And I remember he just kind of turned his head and looked up at me, and I yelled at him, get the hell out of my rabbits. To which he literally went through the fence. Instead of stepping over it, he just decided to drag the whole fence down the canyon wall with him. You know, like a giant train on a dress. I was so mad because I was catching rabbits. I was trying to stuff them into cages. It was just total chaos for the next couple days. And when I confronted Nally about it, Nally and I have a very rocky relationship. It's not emotional. It's just he doesn't want me there, and I think he's ugly. So that's the way our relationship has gone. I think he's an ugly old grouch. I think he was a ugly young grouch when I knew him. And we're not the two best of friends. So I'm telling him mine and leave mine alone, and he's telling me not yours, go away, go away. So there were times that he and I really got into some major wars, and one of them with Nally was, I had a gentleman that lived behind us. His name was Old Man Heater, and he raised dairy cows and a couple hogs. And I would go sit in his orchard and eat apples and throw them at the dairy cows. You know, throw the apple cores down to them, or the apples, depending upon which, because I like the bruises. So I know I'm strange. I was a strange kid. So I'm sitting there, and Nally comes up, and I see him coming over Old Man Heater's fence. He just stepped over it. And I saw him coming, and I didn't want to be alone with him because he had never hurt me, but he always growled and would bare his teeth at me and scare me. So in doing this, I was a little nervous. You know, I was very apprehensive. I was about 12 feet, 10 feet up in a tree, and I stood up and I saw him coming, and I had all these apples right there in the fork of the tree where I'd stuffed them down in because there had been an old squirrel nest there. And I was sitting there eating them. and I saw him coming, and as soon as he got into range, I started bombing him with those apples. So the cows are screaming, they're trying to run away, and I'm bombing him. And he was completely taken by surprise by that act, and he just stood there. He didn't hurt me, he didn't growl at me, he just kind of gave me this, "You are such a pain in the butt" look, and turned around and walked back across the field to the fence. So as he was leaving, I'm yelling at him, and once he got across the fence, he turned around and told me in no uncertain terms that I was to be quiet. And I didn't take that well, so I started screaming even louder. And I was kind of doing this stupid little ha-ha dance up on the branch, and I fell off the branch and broke my collarbone. So I'm sitting at the base of the tree, I'm crying, and he comes back. Now I'm thinking to myself, oh great, he's going to kick me because I'm down, because I was pretty sure that's how Nally was. And as he got closer to me, I didn't want him to see that I was crying, so I shut up, and I stood there. I stood up against the back of the tree, and I was standing there holding my arm, and he started smelling me. He was about not even 4 feet away from me. Started smelling me, sniffing the air. And he knew instantly that I had broken my collarbone. I think he could smell the blood and the break. And he pointed at me and said, "You hurt." And I said, "No, I'm not hurt." And he said, "Yes, you hurt." And I said, "No, I'm not. Go away, you big dumb hairy thing." And he got upset. And I thought he was mad at me for calling him that. Well, the cows, I think because they knew me, because I helped milk them and I helped feed them and things, they were used to me. And for some reason, they had started to come back when I fell. And they were kind of milling around. And instead of running away like they always did, in fear of the Steyama people, they stood there. And I had all these cows standing around me. And Nally was kind of looking at me funny, and he walked back over to the fence, stepped over the fence, and did the howl. It's like a yell hoot that they do for clan members. And tall woman came, and she stood there, and she saw all the cows. And she told Nally to go away. She was shushing him away, like a mother does a little kid. And then she stepped over the fence and came to me. And now I'm crying, because I have no women in my life except for Tall Woman and the other females. I understand them very well, and they understand me. And I'm crying. And she picked me up and carried me back across the fence and took me to my home. And I remember my uncle yelling for my dad, saying, "Up, here comes one." And then he yelled at my dad to stop because it was the female and she had me. So she brought me to the patio and set me there. And then she retreated to the edge of the canyon, which is about 15 feet away from my edge of my house. And she just sat there. And the whole entire time my dad and my uncles were examining my collarbone and looking at me, she sat there, and she kept lifting her head up and could smell. And then she would do this cooing that they do to the babies, to make them calm down. So I always knew that she was there for me. All the females have always been there for me, to keep me safe and to help me. They are some of the most loyal friends you ever want to have. And just because you stop being their friend, or you go away or grow up, does not mean that they stop being your friend. And I kind of want to pass that message along to Kevin, who has his story with his stayama male that he found as a teenager, I guess. Just because you go away or they go away does not mean that they are no longer your friend. Even after 20 years, if they find you back, you are still a member of their clan, their friend. And that's what I wanted to relate today, is that these people may not always look and act like us, and may not have the same emotions always, but their emotions are a lot like ours, very similar to ours. They cry, they laugh, they get angry, they weep, all these things. They carry a grudge, which is a story in and of itself for another time. But I want everyone to know that this is how they are and how they have always been. They're one of the most open group of people I have ever met. And that being said, I will end this round of Kyosa and other remembrances, and I wish you all a good night, and I hope you all have a great weekend ahead.